The weight of noise. There was a time when silence frightened him, not because it was empty, but because it was not. In the quiet, thoughts surfaced. Memories rose without warning. Questions appeared that had been carefully avoided for years. And so, like many others, he learned to surround himself with noise. Constant noise, harmless noise, at least on the surface. Music playing in the background, conversations that filled the air but rarely touched the truth. Notifications lighting up the screen, words upon words, spoken and heard, yet never truly felt. From the outside, his life appeared ordinary, stable even. He had responsibilities, a routine, people who knew his name and expected him to show up. But beneath that structure lived a persistent sense of heaviness, a quiet exhaustion that no amount of distraction could erase. He did not know when it began. Perhaps it started with the first disappointment he learned to hide, or the moment he realized that expressing vulnerability often led to misunderstanding rather than connection. Over time, he became skilled at functioning, at smiling when required, at saying the right things, at staying busy. Busy was safe. Busy meant no pauses long enough for the mind to wander into uncomfortable territory. Busy meant progress, or at least the illusion of it. And so he filled his days with movement and his nights with stimulation, drifting into shallow sleep that never fully restored him. Yet even surrounded by sound, silence found its way in. It appeared in brief moments, standing alone in a room after everyone had left, staring out of a window long after the view had lost meaning, waking in the middle of the night with no clear reason why. In those moments, the noise fell away, and something inside him stirred. A quiet awareness, a question without words. He began to notice how often people spoke, yet how little was truly said. How easily emotions were masked by productivity. How strength was measured by endurance, not honesty. The world moved quickly, rewarding those who kept pace and rarely stopping to ask what was being lost along the way. And he followed that rhythm for a long time, until one evening, when exhaustion outweighed distraction. He sat alone, the usual background sounds muted, not intentionally, simply forgotten. The room was still. No music, no voices, no glowing screens, demanding attention. Just him, his breath, and the subtle hum of existence. At first, the silence felt uncomfortable, almost intrusive. His mind raced, searching for something, anything, to fill the space. But instead of reaching for noise, he stayed. Just a little longer than usual. Long enough to feel the tension in his chest, long enough to notice how shallow his breathing had become. In that moment, something shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but quietly. He realized that the silence was not demanding anything from him. It was not judging, rushing, or expecting. It simply existed, steady, patient, and unmoving. And for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to remain within it. The world had taught him to equate silence with absence, of success, of connection, of relevance. But what he felt then was different. The silence held weight, depth, a presence that had been ignored for far too long. He did not find answers that night, but he found something else, a pause. And within that pause, a subtle recognition, the noise he clung to was not protecting him, it was keeping him distant from himself. That realization lingered, and once noticed, it could not be undone. After that night, silence began to follow him, not as something he sought, but as something that waited. He noticed it in the pauses between conversations, in the moments after laughter faded, in the space between one task and the next. It was as if the noise he once depended on had lost some of its power, and in its place, a quiet awareness had begun to grow. At first, he resisted it. He returned to old habits with renewed intensity, longer hours, Louder distractions, endless scrolling, filling every empty second with something, anything that would keep his mind occupied. He told himself he was fine. Nothing was wrong, that exhaustion was normal, and rest was something to be earned later. But the silence did not disappear. It surfaced in the smallest cracks of his routine. While washing dishes late at night, while walking familiar streets that suddenly felt unfamiliar, while lying awake, listening to the rhythm of his own breathing, aware of how much he had been avoiding it. With silence came discomfort. Unanswered questions rose gently but persistently. Why did he feel so tired even on days when nothing went wrong? Why did achievement feel hollow so quickly? Why did connection feel distant even when surrounded by people? He did not have answers, only sensations. A tightness in the chest, a heaviness behind the eyes, a sense of longing he could not name. There were moments when he almost reached out, almost spoke honestly, almost slowed down, almost allowed himself to be seen, but fear followed closely behind. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of appearing weak, fear that if he stopped moving, everything he had built would collapse. So he pulled back, he withdrew, not from the world entirely, but from depth. Conversations remained polite. Emotions were carefully filtered. He stayed functional, composed, and reliable, the version of himself that required the least explanation. Yet inside, something was shifting. Silence began to feel less like an enemy and more like a mirror. It reflected parts of him he had neglected, his need for rest, for meaning, for truth. It revealed how often he had chosen distraction over presence, comfort over authenticity. And though he still resisted, he could no longer deny what he felt. The noise was losing its grip. He began to notice how rarely he allowed himself to simply be, how every moment was measured by productivity or outcome, how stillness felt foreign, almost forbidden, yet beneath them, discomfort, there was something else, a subtle sense of relief. Silence asked nothing of him. It did not demand success, explanations, or strength. It offered space, and in that space he began to feel both exposed and strangely safe. One evening, instead of turning on music or reaching for his phone, he sat in the quiet again, not because he was ready, but because he was tired of running. His body sank into the stillness, tense at first, alert for discomfort. It came. Memories surfaced, regrets whispered, emotions he had buried made themselves known. But this time, he did not turn away. He stayed, and in staying, he discovered something unexpected. The silence did not break him, it held him. This realization did not bring immediate peace, but it marked the beginning of a shift, a slow withdrawal from noise, and a hesitant step toward something deeper, toward himself. At first, silence felt unfamiliar, like a language he did not yet understand. He would sit still and feel the urge to move, to distract himself, to escape the quiet. His thoughts arrived uninvited, overlapping and restless, as if competing for attention. Some were small and ordinary, others carried weight, lingering, longer than he expected. But something had changed. Instead of turning away, he began to observe. He noticed how thoughts rose and fell without needing to be solved, how emotions shifted when he allowed them space instead of resistance, how the body softened when it was no longer pushed forward by urgency. Silence was no longer an empty space to fill. It was a place to enter. He began to set aside small moments each day, not to achieve calm, but simply to sit. Sometimes it was only a few minutes. Sometimes it felt endless. There were days when restlessness dominated, and days when stillness came unexpectedly, like a quiet gift. In these moments, he learned to breathe more deeply, to feel the weight of his body grounded in the present. to recognize tension not as failure, but as information. The silence did not judge his impatience or reward his effort. It remained steady, inviting him back again and again. Slowly, his relationship with time began to shift. Without constant stimulation, minutes stretched. He became aware of how often he rushed through life, treating moments as obstacles rather than experiences. In silence, there was nowhere to rush to. Each breath existed, fully, without demand. He started to listen, not only to himself, but to the world around him. The subtle sounds he had once ignored became noticeable. The distant hum of the city, the movement of air, the quiet rhythms of everyday life. These sounds did not disturb the silence. They lived within it. With patience, he discovered that silence was not something to conquer, it was something to be respected. In its presence, he no longer felt the need to perform or explain. He did not have to be productive, entertaining, or strong. He could simply exist exactly as he was. And in that simplicity, something within him began to settle. Silence became a teacher, not through answers, but through awareness, not through force, but through consistency. It showed him how much of his suffering came from resistance, from trying to escape discomfort rather than understand it. And as he learned to sit with silence, he realized he was also learning to sit with himself. The turning point did not arrive suddenly. There was no dramatic moment, no single realization that changed everything at once. Instead, it emerged quietly, woven into ordinary days, revealed through small but meaningful shifts. He began to notice how differently he moved through the world. Where he once rushed, he now paused. Where he once reacted, he now observed. Silence had created space between what happened and how he responded. And within that space, something powerful lived. Choice. He no longer felt compelled to fill every moment with words or action. Conversations became slower, more intentional. He listened more than he spoke, not out of withdrawal, but presence. People began to respond differently to him, not because he demanded attention, but because he offered it fully. In silence, he found clarity. Decisions that once felt overwhelming became simpler. Not easier, but clearer. He learned to distinguish between what truly mattered and what merely created noise. Expectations, his own and those of others, lost some of their weight. There were still challenges. Silence did not erase difficulty or protect him from pain, but it changed how he carried it. Instead of resisting discomfort, he allowed it to exist, without letting it define him. Instead of seeking immediate relief, he trusted the process of understanding. This was the moment he realized something essential. Silence was no longer something he visited. It had become something he carried. Even in movement, even in interaction, even in uncertainty, there was a steady center within him, a place untouched by chaos, a place where he could return. Again and again, he felt stronger, though not in the way he had been taught to value strength. There was no hardness, no armor. His strength came from flexibility, from awareness, from the ability to remain grounded when life shifted unexpectedly, and with that strength came compassion. For himself first. He stopped measuring his worth by productivity or constant progress. Rest became valid, stillness became meaningful. He no longer punished himself for needing space. Then for others, he saw how many people lived as he once had, overwhelmed, distracted, disconnected from their inner world. He no longer felt the urge to fix or advise. His presence alone became enough. This was the turning point, not because everything changed, but because he did. And in changing how he related to silence, he changed how he related to life itself. Life did not become quieter on the outside. There were still responsibilities, conversations, expectations. and unpredictable days. The world continued to move at its usual pace, but something within him had changed, and because of that, everything felt different. He was no longer driven by urgency. Instead of reacting automatically, he responded with intention. When challenges appeared, he met them without panic. When uncertainty arose, he allowed it space instead of rushing toward resolution. Silence had taught him that not every moment required an answer. He carried calm with him. It showed in the way he spoke, slower, clearer, more deliberate. It showed in the way he listened, without interruption, without anticipation, without the need to impress. People sensed it. They felt safe around him, though he did nothing to create that effect. This was inner strength. Not the kind that demands recognition, but the kind that steadies the ground beneath you. The kind that allows you to stand firm without hardening, to remain open without losing yourself. He began to trust his internal rhythm. Instead of measuring his days by output, he measured them by alignment. Did his actions reflect his values? Did his choices honor his energy? Did his words feel honest and necessary? When the answer was no, he adjusted gently, without self-judgment. Silence remained his anchor, not as escape, but as connection. In moments of doubt, he returned to it. In moments of clarity, he rested within it. It reminded him that peace was not something to chase, but something to remember. He no longer feared being alone. Solitude became a place of renewal rather than emptiness. In stillness, he felt whole. And from that wholeness, he engaged with the world, not to fill a void, but to share presence. The transformation was subtle, yet profound. Those who knew him noticed it not in what he said, but in how he existed. There was less tension, less resistance, more acceptance. He moved through life with a quiet confidence that did not need explanation. And though he understood that growth was ongoing, he no longer searched for himself in noise or approval. He had found strength where he least expected it, in silence. There came a morning when he stood still and realized something had fully settled within him. Nothing was missing. The world around him looked the same sky, the same streets, the same rhythm of life continuing without pause. And yet his experience of it was entirely different. He no longer felt the need to keep up, to prove, to chase meaning through constant motion. He had learned where to return. Silence was no longer something he entered only in solitude. It lived within him, steady, grounding, unchanged by circumstance. Even in uncertainty, even in loss, even in moments when answers were unclear, there was a place inside him that remained calm. From that place he could feel. He could grieve without collapsing, hope without clinging, love without losing himself. He understood now that strength did not mean resistance to pain, but the ability to stay present with it, to listen, to allow, to trust that not everything needed to be fixed in order to be understood. Looking back, he saw how often he had mistaken noise for connection, distraction for safety, movement for progress. The world had taught him to avoid stillness, to fear quiet, moments where nothing distracted him from himself. But silence had shown him the truth. It was never empty. It was full of awareness, full of clarity, full of the quiet wisdom that only reveals itself when we stop running. In silence, he found honesty. In stillness, he found direction. In solitude, he found belonging. And perhaps most importantly, he learned that silence was not withdrawal from life. It was deeper engagement with it. From this place of inner stability, he moved forward, not with urgency, but with intention. Not driven by fear of falling behind, but guided by an internal sense of alignment. He no longer needed constant reassurance. He trusted himself. The story does not end here, because this was never only his story. It belongs to anyone who has ever felt overwhelmed by noise, exhausted by expectation, or disconnected from their own inner voice. It belongs to those who sense that there is something more, something quieter, deeper, and truer, waiting beneath the surface of everyday life. Silence is always available, not as an escape, but as an invitation to pause, to listen, to return to yourself. And in that return, to discover a strength that does not shout, but endures.